My name is Jan Wagner. Oh, I do not like looking at you through those. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters. I've been here, had the privilege of doing this presentation during election times several years, and always enjoy coming to OLLI. The League of Women Voters is an organization that's over 100 years old. It started when women first got the right to vote in 1920. Despite its name, it is open to women and to men. We have many men who are members. Today, I am coming to talk to you about the 7 propositions that are on the ballot. The League is a political organization. We are a nonpartisan political organization. That means that we do take positions on issues, but we never support a political party or a candidate of any kind. However, today, we're not talking about League positions on issues because we're here for voter service, which means that it is purely an informational session today. I will give you the pros and the cons of each of the initiatives on the ballot as the people who are for them and against them present themselves. Let's see if I know how to make this work. Okay, so this is a face sheet that gives you a bit of general information about the election that's coming up. You have not yet received your ballots in the mail, but you will. They will be going out to all registered voters on the 10th of October, and early voting will begin on the 11th. It will continue, obviously, until Election Day of November the 8th. There are drop boxes that will open on October the 11th. You can access various vote centers that will open at various hours also beginning that time, and they're up and down the county. This is a snapshot of the CA Votes homepage. You can find a wide range of information on this homepage that will assist you in voting. The little green Voter's Edge box up in the corner, you can type your home address into that site and it will pull up your ballot, which is a nice, easy way to work on what you want to do. Candidates can put information, they put it in themselves, it is what they want you to know. It is free to candidates, so it's a nice, free, easy advertisement for candidates in Voter's Edge. Usually when I come to talk to you, you have already received your ballot. And what I tell you is that there is a line. There is the proposition itself, and then there's analysis by the LAO, the Legislative Analyst's Office. That is factual information. And this is a link to the Legislative Analyst's Office and a link to the actual proposition analysis that they prepare. That is all factual information. You can trust it. If you want to read it, it's a lot of information, but it is truth. Then there's a line, and everything else that is in that voter guide or that ballot is what somebody has paid to put there. And it is their interpretation or their position on what you are reading. And it even says so in really tiny print that it is not checked for factual information. So what are the propositions that we're going to be looking at? Propositions are proposed laws presented to the public. They can make new laws, they can change existing laws, and they can change our Constitution. They're placed on the ballot either by collecting enough signatures from voters or by the state lawmakers themselves. And it only takes 50% plus 1 vote saying yes to pass a proposition. There are 6 items on this ballot that are propositions. The 7th is a referendum, and it's a little bit different, and we'll talk about that at the time. For propositions, a yes vote means that you approve all of what the proposition has to say. And all is an important word because you only get a simple yes or a simple no. No means you simply want to leave things the way they are now. So is it a simple or a complex issue? If it's too complex for a yes vote, then that's a problem. That's all you get is a yes or a no. Is it a constitutional amendment or is it a statute? Statutes are much easier to change than things that go into our Constitution. Who are the sponsors and the opponents? The real sponsors. Citizens for the American Way can be a whole lot of different people. So who are the real sponsors and the opponents, and do you agree with them? How is it paid for? Does it tell us that government has to do something? And if it does it identify how it's going to be paid for? What are the merits of the idea itself? Do you agree with that? Does it fit with your values? When in doubt, you do not have to vote for every single item on your ballot for your ballot to be valid. You can skip it and just move on. So when in doubt, you can leave it blank. That's one thing that we find with our first voters. We tell them, register and vote, register and vote, register and vote. And all they hear about is who's running for president or who's running for governor. And then they get the ballot. And it's got judges and Board of Equalization, and they're going, who the heck is that? What do I do with that? And they feel like they're failing a test. And oftentimes they never vote again. So that's something that we really need to pay attention to, is it's okay to only vote for what you know. So these are the items that we will, in fact, be talking about today. The first 6 are propositions. Some of them are constitutional amendments. Most of them are constitutional amendments. And the last one is a referendum. Constitutional amendment is Proposition 1. It's the constitutional right to reproductive freedom. And it would amend the California Constitution to, quote, "The state shall not deny or interfere with an individual's reproductive freedom in their most intimate decisions, which includes their fundamental right to choose to have an abortion and their fundamental right to choose or refuse contraceptions." California law already requires that abortion providers to be licensed. In addition, abortions can only be performed on a viable fetus if the pregnancy puts the health or life of the pregnant person at risk. Under state law currently, a fetus is considered viable if the fetus is likely to be able to survive outside the uterus. Nothing in this amendment changes any of that. There is no budgetary effect of this initiative because reproductive rights are already protected by state law. Healthcare services are covered in California by Medi-Cal and include abortion and contraceptives. The state and federal government share the cost of most Medi-Cal services, including contraceptives. However, the state pays the full cost of abortions provided through Medi-Cal. About 2 million Californians buy their health care through insurance plans through this health insurance called Covered California. Healthcare services covered by these plans include abortion and contraceptives. So what do people in favor of this constitutional amendment say? They say that the assertion that rights which are not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution must be deeply rooted in the history and the traditions of the nation in order to be guaranteed by the Constitution leaves important rights vulnerable. And that was the assertion that was stated when the Dobbs decision came down. It is not clear how a federal legislative ban on abortion would impact the changes which would be made by Proposition 1. There is no federal legislative ban now, and we don't know if there ever will be. But if there is, and if Proposition 1 passed, how those two would interact is unclear. The Constitution establishes a system of dual sovereignty between states and the federal government. So what is clear is if both of those things ever happened, we'd be in court. The supporters are essentially the Democratic Party leadership, and Planned Parenthood. The people against it, the cons, and what they say. They say women already have the right to choose under current California law, and Proposition 1 is an extreme and costly measure that punishes taxpayers and causes abortion seekers from outside California to swamp our healthcare system. And the opponents are the Republican Party and California bishops, California Catholic bishops. So that is Proposition 1. I'm going to, because of time, I'm going to suggest that we have questions at the end rather than as we go along. So jot down what your questions are, if you would. So now we're on Propositions 26 and 27. They are closely related, although you will vote on them separately, and they were proposed separately. They are separate initiatives, but they're both about sports gambling, and so I'm going to talk about them in some cases together. So first of all, they may be competing initiatives. So what happens if both competing initiatives win? Proposition 26 and 27, if they may be considered competing propositions on which huge amounts of money are being spent. None of you have seen any ads, I'm sure. State law is actually very explicit about defining what happens when competing initiatives both win. So, when there are conflicting measures, the California Constitution says very clearly that if there are two measures that conflict and each and they both pass, the one that passes by a higher percentage of the vote takes effect and the other one does not. Anticipating this, the authors of and proponents of Proposition 27 have written into their measure a provision that says, quote, "We, the people of California, declare that Proposition 27 does not conflict with Proposition 26. Courts, of course, will do an independent analysis about whether or not the provisions can be operational together or whether implementing them is not possible. If a court finds that they are in conflict, whichever one gets the most votes will be operational and the other one will not. If a court finds that they are complementary, that they don't conflict with one another, then they could both take effect. So what are they? Proposition 26 allows in-person roulette, dice games, and sports wagering on tribal lands. There's a lot of key components there to pay attention to. This ballot measure would define sports betting as wagering on the results of professional, college, and amateur sports athletic events, with the exception of high school sports and California college teams. Everybody else can be bet on. People would need to be 21 years of age to bet legally on sports. It is a constitutional amendment, and that's because there's a constitutional amendment that legalizes gambling in California. So, how is it now? In 2018, the US Supreme Court eliminated the federal prohibition on sports betting, leaving it to the states to authorize and regulate sports wagering within their borders. Prior to that, Las Vegas, Nevada was the only place in the country that could legally have sports betting. The Federal Indian Gaming Regulatory Act declares that Congress seeks to advance tribal economic development, tribal self-sufficiency, and strong tribal governments by allowing gaming. The California Gaming Control Commission is the state regulatory body that acts as the trustee over revenues deposited into an Indian Gaming Revenue Sharing Fund. And that's money that gets deposited in that fund and goes to the tribes that do not have casinos on their property, because there are a lot of tribes where that's simply not viable. Those Indian tribes do not feel there's enough money put into that fund. So right now, gambling in California is only permitted through the state lottery, through card rooms. There's one in the City of Commerce, horse racing, and at tribal casinos. Sports betting is not legal anywhere. And tribal casinos are unable to offer roulette or dice games such as craps. So there are, under Prop 26, 4 existing racetracks could offer in-person sports betting, but you'd have to go to the 4 racetracks. Racetracks would pay the state a share of the sports bets made. Tribal casinos could offer in-person sports betting, could offer roulette, and could offer games played with dice. If there are new individual gaming compacts, because we would have to have another negotiation with the tribes on what those gaming compacts would look like. And if people or groups believe that someone is breaking these laws, they can file a civil lawsuit in state courts. We've had a lot of back and forth on the TV between these two. Not much has been paid attention to Prop 26 itself and what it would do. If it passes, it's a significant expansion in what is allowed in our Indian casinos. The budget effect. It would certainly increase state revenues, probably reaching into the tens of millions of dollars annually. Some of those revenues would support regulatory fees, but it would certainly be sufficient to cover those regulatory costs. There are many uncertainties in the revenue estimates because we really don't know what the new gaming compacts with the tribes would look like. We don't know what new games would look like. The other thing we don't know is that this particular initiative really impacts the local card rooms. In some cases, it impacts them very severely. And those provide a lot of local revenue to the cities where they are located, and could have a significant negative effect on those local economies. So I know this is too big for you to read, so I'll give you highlights. This is what the people in favor say. The first person quoted is the chairman of the Pechanga Band of Indians, and it says Californians should have the choice to participate in sports wagering in a highly regulated, safe, and experienced gaming location. And then it goes on. The chairman of the California Nations of Indian Gaming Association says a strong, well-regulated gaming industry is of utmost importance to California's tribal governments. And this is really impossible to read. Essentially, this is primarily supported by the tribes that have viable gaming casinos on their lands. And that's really who's behind this initiative. So, what do the people against it say? So the first person that's quoted is the executive director of the California Contract Cities Association. And he says that the California Contract Cities Association overwhelmingly voted to oppose the qualified tribal gaming initiative as it will not benefit our residents in any way. The mayor of the City of Commerce says during the pandemic, California's cities depended on the revenues depended on the revenues generated through legal gaming at card rooms, have seen the devastating impacts card room closures have had on their municipal budgets. And the president of the California Gaming Association says this initiative does nothing to advance sports wagering and instead expands tribal casinos' tax-free monopoly. And the opponents are the Republican Party, the California Contract Cities Association, and non-tribal gaming interests. These are the people, the tribes that have casinos are in favor of Prop 26, and the tribes that don't have casinos are the ones that are going to be in favor of Prop 27. So, Prop 27. Legalize sports betting and revenue for homelessness prevention fund initiative. That's Prop 27. So, again, the situation as it is now is the same as it was under Prop 26. What Prop 27 would do is something very different. Prop 27 allows licensed tribes or gambling companies, any gambling company, anywhere, could offer online sports betting over the internet and mobile devices to people 21 years of age and older on non-tribal lands in California. So the other one was in person at specific locations. This is online and through the internet. Those offering online sports betting would be required to pay the state a share of sports bets made, and it would create a new state regulatory agency. Interestingly, normally when initiatives, propositions, constitutional amendments are passed through this process, the legislature then has to write up a body of laws to make it happen. The people who wrote this proposition included in it 55 pages of law that becomes part of our Constitution that makes it happen. So the budget effect. It certainly will increase revenues, probably in the hundreds of millions of dollars and probably not more than $500 million annually. And some revenues would support state regulatory costs, probably reaching in the mid-tens of millions of dollars, but certainly they would cover the regulatory costs. So what about the homelessness money? 10% of bets minus expenses, which is promotions, prizes, taxes, and in the laws written it specifically cannot be limited, are paid into a state trust fund. Then the fund first must pay all state regulatory costs out of that 10%, or what's left of that 10%. What's remaining will be used to address homelessness, addiction, and mental health issues that homeless individuals face. Income would likely cover any regulatory costs. Whoops, I'm checking my notes here. Oh, the rest of the revenue to the state is specifically not counted towards Prop 98. Prop 98 is the money that is that is allocated in the state budget by statute to fund schools and education. So this money, it goes out of the Prop 98 guarantee. So what do the people in favor say? Again, I know you can't read this because there's too much. Major League Baseball says, as legalized sports betting continues to expand across the country, Major League Baseball remains committed to protecting the integrity of its games and creating a safe experience for fans who wish to wager. Spokesman for the Prop 27 campaign says, our measure is the only one that would guarantee hundreds of millions of dollars each year in solutions to homelessness and mental health support. And the CEO of All Home, if we permit and regulate online sports betting in California, California residents should benefit from it. Since 2018, approximately 35 states have legalized sports gambling, but not all 35 states have it operational. So who are the supporters? Essentially, there are 4 mayors: Fresno mayor, Long Beach mayor, Oakland mayor, and Sacramento mayor, the Indian tribes that do not have casinos, and Major League Baseball. What do the people against it say? President and CEO of the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce says the corporate online gaming proposition was written for the sole benefit of out-of-state gambling corporations. Chamber of the Verona Band of Mission Indians says this measure would authorize the largest expansion of gambling in state history, allowing virtually anyone, anywhere, anytime to gamble. James Silva of the California Nation's Indian Gambling Association says, don't be fooled. These measures are not to fix homelessness, but rather a massive explosion of gaming that will directly undercut tribal sovereignty. The opponents are the Democratic Party leadership, the Republican Party, and the tribal gaming interests. So the Republican Party opposes them both. The Democratic Party leadership opposes this one. Prop 28. Prop 28 is also a legislative constitutional amendment, getting a theme here, and it is about the arts. Proposition 28, I mentioned a minute ago, is amended the state constitution to require a minimum percentage of the state's funds to be spent on K through 14, first 2 years of college, education. Funding for the arts in education is a local decision. It is decided upon by your local school boards. California's public schools are operated by school districts and charter schools serving about 6 million K-12 students, roughly 60% of whom are from low-income families living in households with an income between 130 and 185% of the federal poverty threshold. State law requires schools to provide arts and music instruction to all students in grades 1 through 6. Doesn't say how. Students in grades 7 through 8 must be offered such courses as electives. Students in high school must complete 1 year of arts or music education, plus a foreign language or a career technical education course. So what would Prop 28 do? It would require the state to set aside a share of its revenue equal to 1% of whatever that year's Prop 98 guarantee is. That changes from year to year. For arts and education classes, the new money would be disproportionately reserved for schools with many low-income students. So 70% of the funding would be based just on general population, and 30% would go in addition to students that have a high percentage of low income, or schools that have a high percentage of low income students. The budget effect, it would increase state costs of about $1 billion annually beginning next year for arts education in public schools. The legislature could reduce that funding in extraordinary years when they chose to reduce the funding for Prop 98. That's called suspending the Prop 98 guarantee. It's kind of a third rail. It's very, very hard to do and very, very unpopular. I think it's been done once. So those in favor of Prop 98, what do they say? These are both people from LAUSD. The first is an LAUSD board member. LAUSD is LA Unified, Los Angeles Unified School District. And she says Black and Latinx students comprise 61% of pre-K-12 enrollment in California, 77% in low-income communities. In Los Angeles Unified, the second largest school district in the country, 80% of our students are low income. We know that arts education increases their opportunities. Austin Buettner, former superintendent of LA Unified, says only 1 in 5 public schools in California has a dedicated teacher for traditional arts instruction, like music, dance, theater, art, or newer forms of creative expression, like computer graphics, animation, and coding. The supporters are former Austin Buettner, former LAUSD superintendent, U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan. Let's see, who else? California Teachers Association, and several individuals. What do those against Prop 98 or Prop 28 say? First of all, you have to realize that there is no organized opposition to this measure. There's no organized spending against this measure, and there's no listed opposition to this measure. So what I'm giving you here is simply 2 editorials, one from the Mercury News and East Bay Times and one from the LA Times. And they both essentially say, well, the first one says spending on K-12 public education has reached record levels, but student enrollment is at its lowest point in 2 decades and going down. It's fiscally reckless to keep earmarking unpredictable state general fund money when we don't know what the future holds. LA Times says this is a bad idea. Right now, state coffers are flush, but when revenue becomes tight in the future, the governor and legislature needs as much flexibility as it can get. Again, there are no listed opponents or no listed funds against this measure. I don't think we've had a ballot in a long time that hasn't dealt with dialysis. Prop 29 is once again a dialysis measure. It enacts staffing requirements, reporting requirements, ownership disclosure, and closing requirements for chronic dialysis clinics. There are about 600 dialysis clinics in California. They serve about 80,000 patients, and to address patients' needs, they often are open 6 days a week. 2 private for-profit dialysis companies, DaVita Incorporated and Fresenius Medical Care, own or run about 3/4 of our clinics in California. Prop 8 in 2018 and Prop 23 in 2020 were very similar to this one. They all 3 arise from a labor dispute. The union says workers have been trying to unionize since 2016, but are being retaliated against for their pro-union activities. What Prop 29 would do: chronic dialysis clinics would be required to have a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant on site during all patient hours. Right now, each patient has those services through their own doctors or through their own health care. The primary difference in this proposition from the other 2 is that it also has a requirement for doctors with a 5% or greater interest in the clinic. They have to notify you of that. And it has a telehealth provision if there's a shortage of professional care. The fiscal impact: it would be more expensive for the clinics. It wouldn't be more expensive for the state, but it would be more expensive for the clinics. Those in favor: David Miller, research director of the union, says there's just so much improvement that can be made, and there's plenty of resources in the industry to make those improvements. The supporters are essentially the Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare Workers West. As of August 17th of 2022, supporters reported raising $8,100,000 for this measure. The cons: those against it say since 2012, the union has wasted $77.7 million of its members' dues funding 48 failed ballot initiatives across the country. This is the 3rd ballot measure since 2018 targeting dialysis providers. The opponents are the Republican Party and the California Chamber of Commerce and the California Medical Association, but it is completely funded by DaVita Incorporated and Fresenius Medical Care, who as of August 17th had reported raising $42,978,000, which is about 5 times as much as the supporters. Prop 30. Prop 30 provides funding for programs to reduce air pollution and to prevent wildfires by increasing taxes on personal income over $2 million annually. And it's an initiative. It's the first one. So it increases taxes on the highest persons in our state. California has the highest personal income tax rate for its wealthiest in the country. It's 13.3% for earners over $1 million. Our very volatile tax system relies very heavily on those earners. We have a 9.3% tax rate for those making $53,000 to $269,000, and 13.3% for those making over $1 million. We have implemented a number of programs to promote zero-emission vehicles. This includes requiring ride-sharing companies such as Uber and Lyft to have 90% of their drivers driving zero-emission vehicles by 2030. In addition, the state's electrical grid requires upgrades in order to handle that increased capacity. And the state currently has approximately $10 billion allocated over 5 years to increase the number of zero-emission vehicles and to address the grid. $4 billion annually is also allocated for wildfires. What Prop 30 would do would increase the top tax rate for people earning over, it would increase the top tax rate to 15.5% for every dollar above $2 million in income. I'm going to read you a quote. You haven't received your ballot yet, so you haven't read it yet yourself. It's a little confusing, so listen carefully, but it's pretty interesting. On August 25th, 2022, the California Air Resources Board issued a regulation requiring 35% of new cars sold in California to be electric vehicles by 2026 and 100% by 2035. The Legislative Analyst's Office report says this in the Voter Information Guide, quote, if the state approves the zero-emission vehicle mandate, then the additional funding from this proposition to help buy new zero-emission vehicles would not have much effect on the total number of zero-emission vehicles driven in California. This is because the zero-emission vehicle mandate would already require a significant increase in the number of zero-emission vehicles sold, even without the additional spending. Instead, the proposition's main effect would be to shift who pays for the zero-emission vehicles. That is, more costs would be covered by revenue from the new tax on high-income taxpayers instead of vehicle sellers and/or buyers. This would not have much effect on state and local finances. However, if the state does not approve the zero-emission vehicle mandate, then the funding from the proposition to help buy new zero-emission vehicles would increase the number of zero-emission vehicles and decrease the number of gasoline or diesel-powered vehicles driven in California. As a result, the amount of gasoline being used would be less. Interesting. So, the revenue collected from this additional tax would support zero-emission vehicle programs and wildfire response and prevention activities. The budget effect: increased state tax revenue ranging from $3.5 billion to $5 billion annually. It has another wrinkle. We have something in our state called the GAN limit. We passed an initiative a long time ago named after Mr. Gann, who wrote it. And it has it puts a spending cap on what we can spend in the state of California. Increasing income tax revenue could cause the state to reach its spending limit, called the GAN limit, which would mean that the mandated expenditures under Prop 30 for zero-emission vehicles and wildfires would require cutbacks in expenditures in other areas to stay under the GAN limit. So, those in favor. Dr. Ashley McClure, who's the co-founder of Climate Health Now, says this is a Robin Hood type of initiative. I commend Lyft. Lyft is the main sponsor, because they are trying to align incentives in the right way. The chief policy officer for SPUR says Prop 30 will finance this bold agenda in a way that's true to our California values by increasing the tax on personal income above $2 million by 1.75%. The funding will come solely from 1% of Californians most able to afford it. Those in favor are U.S. Representatives Ro Khanna and Barbara Lee, the California Democratic Party, and Lyft, who has been the primary funder of this initiative, and the Cal Fire unions, and Tom Steyer. The cons. This is probably the first time of doing pros and cons that I've seen these two people on the same page. Those against are Governor Gavin Newsom and John Kupal, president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. Governor Newsom says, Prop 30 is a special interest carve-out, a cynical scheme devised by a single corporation to funnel state income tax revenue to their company. Californians should know that just this year, our state committed $10 billion for electric vehicles and their infrastructure. Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association says we already have some of the highest taxes in the country. A lot of the air pollution in Southern California could be eliminated by spending transportation dollars on freeway improvements to reduce traffic jams. If these proposals are really priorities, they should be paid for out of the existing general fund. The opponents are Governor Gavin Newsom, the Republican Party of California, the California Teachers Association, and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. Indeed. Indeed. Okay, Prop 31. This is our referendum. It upholds the ban on flavored tobacco sales. Prop 31 is a referendum which asks voters to decide on a law that was already passed. For a referendum, a yes vote means that you support the law that was passed and want to keep it. A no vote means you do not want the law to go into effect. So in 2020, the legislature passed and the governor signed into law Senate Bill 793 that banned in-person stores and vending machines from selling most flavored tobacco products and tobacco product flavor enhancers. This law did not go into effect because a referendum on the law qualified for the ballot. A yes vote on Prop 31 means that selling flavored tobacco products is banned. A no vote means that selling flavored tobacco products can continue. When considering the ban, state legislators cited a 2018 study by the Centers for Disease Control that found that 67% of high school students and 49% of middle school students who used tobacco products used flavored tobacco products. And it came in response to a surge in teen use of flavored tobacco with flavors like menthol, apple, cotton candy, and gummy bears. Related to, though not included in this law, is a current FDA proposal to ban menthol cigarettes. It has not yet been acted on. A final decision on that proposal has not been made. Remember that since both state and local governments control tobacco sales, about a third of Californians already live in areas where you cannot purchase menthol cigarettes. So what would Prop 31 do? It would ban the sale of most flavored tobacco products and enhancers. It defines them as a flavor that could include, this is not an exhaustive list, fruit, mint, menthol, honey, chocolate, or vanilla. It defines a tobacco product flavor enhancer as a product that creates a flavor when added to a tobacco product. It charges a $250 penalty for every violation. It does not ban shisha or hookah products sold and used in a store, certain cigars, and loose leaf tobacco. Budget effect. It has an interesting and very uncertain budget effect. Proposition 31 would likely reduce state tobacco tax revenue by an amount ranging from tens of millions to around $100 million annually. Last year, the state tobacco tax revenue was about $2 billion. Tobacco tax in California largely funds health care. It would probably also make people healthier. So the use of health care might go down. So we'd get less revenue for health care. Hopefully we'd use less health care. So what that would turn out in terms of budget is a bit uncertain. Then you can add the wrinkle that if people are healthier, they might live longer. And the longer we live, the more expensive we are in terms of health care. So I don't know. Those in favor, Governor Newsom. Big tobacco has been for targeting our kids, trying to hook our kids on tobacco products, killing literally a generation, and it's time for us to stand up and protect our children. Managing Director of the American Cancer Society. The tobacco industry has always shown it will go to any length to deceive the public about its deadly product. State Senator Hill. California fought big tobacco and won. This shameless industry is a sore loser and is relentless. The supporters. Governor Newsom, California Teachers Association, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and the American Cancer Society. The cons, those against. Joe Lang, he's managing partner at some office. It is already illegal for anyone under 21 to use any tobacco product, flavored or not. Proposition 31 is not a ban on flavored tobacco for children. That's already illegal. It's a ban on legal regulated sales to adult consumers. And the California Coalition for Fairness says, we agree, youth should never have access to any tobacco product. But this can be achieved without imposing a total prohibition on products that millions of adults choose to use. The opponents are the tobacco companies. And they are spending about $20 million. So we do have some local measures, and I'm going to stop here before I go on to some resources and see if you have any questions. None? Oh, yes, back there. Ellie says, wait.
Our people on Zoom cannot hear the questions unless.
Oh, yes, we have a Zoom. We have company on Zoom.
You said on Proposition 1 that the amendment would not change the existing law. Does that mean that it would still be illegal for abortion for a viable fetus?
That is correct. All it does is take the existing law and write it into the Constitution.
There's someone here.
Yes.
On 26 and 27, I've noticed that whenever there are advertisements for NFL games, there are advertisements for the betting on your phone from the same companies that are trying to make their they want to have people be able to bet on their phones. And they're saying if you bet $5, you'll get this back. How are they able to have commercials promoting that if it's illegal in California to have sports betting on games?
Well, I guess they're paying for, I mean, the games are national.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on what kind of commercials coverage they're paying for. It also may be that they're paying for, that those bets are on fantasy games. Fantasy football is not considered sports betting because the games don't really exist. So that's not, it's a whole separate ball game. But if it probably is just that for some reason they're paying the expense of the California market. Realize that Prop 27 is almost entirely funded by the four big online sports betting companies, FanDuel and I don't even know all of their names.
There's no references to these propositions in those commercials.
No, there isn't. But it's a nice subtle way of letting people know that it exists. Yes.
Okay, so in Prop 26, it says legalize in-person sports betting.
Put the microphone closer to you, Patty.
Okay, now?
Yes, please.
Okay. In Prop 26, it says legalize in-person sports betting at 4 horse racing racetracks. Does that mean you're only gonna bet on those horses? Because you already can do that.
No.
It's all sports betting.
That is
will be
correct.
available.
It's just that you can, you have an alternative to going to a casino. You can bet on a wide range of things at the horse, at the 4-horse race
So, do we know
venues.
which 4 in California?
I think there are only 4 in
So it's the
California
one
that
up
are
San
currently.
Francisco, San Diego, LA, Santa Anita. I don't know where the first one is.
I don't know,
Is it
but
Los Al?
I think
they're-
there's
they're
Los
listed in-
Alamitos, there's Del Mar,
Santa Anita?
Santa
They're listed
Anita.
in the proposition.
Okay.
You can read the explanation, because they have to be listed in there.
Wow, so they'll really pick up business.
They probably would love that, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question online. So I'm going to read it from the chat. Is the addition, this is regarding the music funding, is the additional percentage of funding for the arts in addition to Prop 98, or does it reduce the Prop 98 funding?
It is in addition to Prop 98. It is completely separate from Prop 98 funding, but it is calculated on the basis of Prop 98 funding. So it is 1% of whatever the Prop 98 funding is for that year, but it is on top of that Prop 98 funding, not out of the Prop 98 funding.
And a second question from Zoom regarding Prop 30. Why is Lyft so invested in this proposition? What's in it for them?
Because a huge percentage of their fleet has to be zero-emission vehicles very quickly. And if they get an incentive for purchasing those vehicles out of tax dollars if it passes.
And then the second part was, why isn't Uber interested?
I think Uber is just letting Lyft do the lifting.
No.
Other questions? Okay, let's just quickly go through. In California, all you have to do when you get your ballot is seal it, sign it, and return it. It has to be postmarked by the 8th of November. It doesn't have to have a stamp on it. You can choose to track it if you want to by signing up at where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov. You can vote by mail. You can drop it in a ballot box. And our ballot boxes are so secure that if a truck runs into it, the truck loses. Vote centers will open October 30th through November 2nd from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And on November 3rd, they open an additional hour at 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Voter's Edge, again, is that little green box. You can find it on our website, and you can put in your address, and it will pull up your ballot. And this is a list of websites. The top one is our website. The voter guide is the official voter information guide. The Easy Voter, which is what we passed out here. Those of you online can click on that and print one yourself. The Legislative Analyst's Office is the one that can give you more factual information than you ever wanted to know. And Ballotpedia at the bottom is a wonderful and very up-to-date source on where money is coming from for all of these initiatives. And I thank you all very, very much for your attention this morning. Please remember to vote.